If I ever go missing, it will be because Andre killed me. Those were the chilling words Andreen McDonald once told her close friend. At the time, it sounded like the kind of thing people say when they're angry or maybe exaggerating after a bad argument. But when Andreen suddenly vanished in March of 2019, those words transformed from a passing remark into a haunting prophecy. She was a devoted mother, a sharp businesswoman, and the kind of friend who always showed up when you needed her. So when she failed to appear for work, when her phone went silent, and when her friends couldn't reach her, it wasn't just unusual. It was terrifying. And as the hours passed, that fear deepened. Because while search parties began looking for Andreen, her husband Andre was already taking steps that made no sense for a worried spouse. He told lies, avoided questions, and bought things no husband should ever need when his wife is missing. This wasn't just a disappearance. From the very beginning, it felt like a case where the truth had been hiding in plain sight. On the surface, Andreen and Andre McDonald seemed to have it all. They were young, ambitious, and driven, partners in marriage, in business, and in life. Andre was a decorated officer in the U.S. Air Force, known for his discipline and quiet confidence. Andreen was just as impressive, earning her degree from the University of Texas at San Antonio and pouring her energy into building their assisted living business. Together, they expanded from one facility to several, creating $1 million enterprise that gave them financial freedom most couples could only dream of. They had a beautiful daughter, Elena, a home in the San Antonio suburbs, and even Andreen's mother living with them to help raise the little girl. To friends and neighbors, they looked like the picture of success, a hard-working military man and a determined businesswoman creating a life of stability for their family. But behind that polished image, cracks had already begun to form. Arguments over money. Long stretches of tension. Whispers about loyalty and control. And then there were the secrets. Tattoos that symbolized something more than just ink, quiet trips back to Jamaica, and an old flame who never really disappeared from Andreen's life. Those fractures in trust, the ones easy to ignore when things seemed good, were slowly carving a fault line through their marriage. And soon, it would erupt in a way that no one could ignore. On the morning of March 1, 2019, Andreen's routine broke in a way that immediately alarmed the people closest to her. She didn't show up for work. She didn't answer her phone. For a woman as responsible and disciplined as Andreen, that was unthinkable. One of her closest friends, Carol, felt a pit in her stomach. The two women had built a bond not just as friends, but as business competitors turned confidants. And Carol knew Andreen well enough to sense something was very wrong. When hours passed with no word, Carol decided to go to the McDonald home herself. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Both of Andreen's cars were parked in the driveway. Her phone, her purse, and her keys, all the things she would never leave behind, were inside. But Andreen herself was nowhere to be found. Then Carol spotted something that made her heart race. On the back patio, she noticed a small pile of ashes, as if someone had lit a fire and left it smoldering. Mixed in the debris was something chilling, the charred outline of what looked like a zipper. Clothing had been burned there. What? Pushing past her fear, Carol entered through a back door that had been left open. Inside, she searched for answers but found only more questions. In the bathroom, a faint blood smear streaked across the light switch. It was small, so easy to overlook, but undeniable. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. At that moment, Carol couldn't have known just how important that single photo would become. Later, investigators would confirm it matched Andreen's DNA. But standing there in her friend's home, all Carol knew was that the worst fear was already unfolding. And then, as if echoing in her mind, she remembered Andreen's haunting words. If I ever go missing, it will be because Andre killed me. If you're into true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you more. When deputies first questioned Andre McDonald, his behavior set off alarm bells. He told them he had just been to the hospital to check if Andreen was there, claiming maybe she had been admitted. It was a story that sounded caring, on the surface. But a quick phone call exposed the lie. No one by her name had been admitted. Confronted, Andre shifted gears. He admitted the two had argued the night before, but insisted he had no idea where she had gone. Then he stopped talking altogether. For investigators, it was a familiar pattern. The half-truths, the sudden silence, the husband closing ranks when his wife vanished. But while his wife's friends and family were combing the streets for her, Andre's movements told a different story. Surveillance cameras at a local hardware store captured him pushing a cart loaded with items that felt more suited to a horror movie than a frantic search. A shovel, an axe, work gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, and 2 5-gallon gas cans. He paid for some with a card, others with cash, as if trying to blur the trail. Not long after, cameras at a gas station caught him filling the containers with fuel. And later, at a gun shop, he selected a pistol and a significant amount of ammunition. But then, bizarrely, he walked out, leaving behind the gun, the ammo, and even his ID. Investigators watching him later described it as a man unraveling in real time. From the outside, Andre's behavior didn't look like panic. It looked deliberate. Step by step, he was gathering tools not to find his missing wife, but to erase her. And with each contradiction, each lie, each unsettling purchase, the spotlight on him only grew brighter. As news spread of Andreen's disappearance, the community rallied. Volunteers poured in. Friends, neighbors, strangers who had never met her but felt compelled to help. The Bihar County Sheriff's Office organized massive search efforts, joined by military personnel and even the FBI. 4 days, teams on horseback ATVs, and on foot swept through rugged Texas countryside. They trudged through fields, combed wooded areas, and scoured riverbeds. Each stretch of land they cleared was one more space where hope flickered, only to fade again. But one person was noticeably absent. Andre. He didn't join the searches, didn't plead with the public for help, didn't hand out flyers with his wife's face. Instead, he stayed silent. Out on house arrest, he sat in the very home where investigators had already found blood, burned fabric, and signs of a cover-up. To those watching, his silence screamed louder than words ever could. Law enforcement pressed forward anyway, certain the answer was out there somewhere. They tracked cell phone records, mapped out his possible routes, and returned again and again to the same rural stretches of land. But no matter how hard they searched, they came up empty. And all the while, Andre showed no urgency, no emotion, no desperation to bring his wife home. To the people who loved Andreen, it was as if he already knew there would be nothing to find. What no one realized then was how cruel the truth really was. Because while hundreds of people scoured mile after mile of Texas countryside, Andreen's remains were hidden in a place shockingly close to home, just yards away, waiting to be found. Months passed with no answers, and for Andreen's family, the waiting was unbearable. Each day was a cruel loop, hope rising with the morning, only to collapse into despair when search teams returned with nothing. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers scoured the countryside, but the question of where Andreen was remained painfully open. Then, in July of 2019, the truth surfaced, not through a carefully planned search but through sheer accident. A local farmer named Clifton was walking his land in Bihar County. His task that evening was ordinary. He wanted to collect a cow's skull to use as a decoration for a friend. But as he moved across his property, something unusual stopped him in his tracks. A foul, unnatural odor drifted through the air. Following it, he stumbled upon a strange pile of bones. At first, Clifton thought they were from a cow. That made sense. This was ranch country and animal remains weren't uncommon. But as he looked closer, something didn't feel right. Mixed in with the animal bones were fragments that didn't look like livestock at all. Fear set in. Realizing what he might have discovered, Clifton backed away and immediately called the sheriff's office. When investigators arrived, they quickly realized this was no ordinary discovery. The pile wasn't just cow bones. Human remains lay beneath, burned and concealed with debris, as though someone had tried to disguise a body in plain sight. It was Andreen McDonald. The sight itself told a horrifying story. Charred scraps of clothing lay scattered among the ashes. Bones were fractured in unnatural ways, suggesting not only fire but violence before it. Some showed blunt impacts consistent with repeated hammer blows. This wasn't only murder. It was desperation. The medical examiner's findings made the tragedy even clearer. Andreen's jaw had been fractured. Her spine showed damage consistent with blunt force trauma. Even her finger bones bore signs of burning, as if her body had been set on fire after death. The remains were so badly damaged that a single cause of death could not be determined, but 2 possibilities emerged: blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. Both pointed to violence at the hands of someone she trusted. And if the scene painted a grim picture, Andre's own digital footprint sealed the impression. Investigators pulled his search history and found chilling queries. How long does DNA last outdoors? How long before bones become brittle? How long does it take for blood to disappear? These weren't random questions. They betrayed exactly what had been on his mind the night Andreen vanished. This was no tragic accident. No split-second mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to erase a woman whose only mistake was giving her trust, and her life, to the wrong man. 4 years after Andrine's disappearance and her remains found, Andre MacDonald had kept his mouth shut. No statements to police. No explanations to the family. Just silence. But in early 2023, days before his trial was set to begin, he broke that silence in the most unexpected way.
So there is absolutely no way you can legally have business and assets with a spouse and then get a divorce and not have half go to one spouse and half go to the other one. So in my opinion, the only way she was going to get everything to go share with a boyfriend, they had to have been planning get me whacked when I went to Jamaica. And that's what you were thinking. Yes, that's what I was thinking. She's right there. So I told her, look, tomorrow when I leave work, I'm going to go back downtown to the divorce lawyer and I'm going to get a divorce. This time, I'm not pulling it up. Which basically means I'm not stopping the divorce like I did the first time.
Andre picked up the phone and called his former mother-in-law, the very woman helping raise his daughter. On that call, he admitted to killing Andrine, but insisted it wasn't murder. He claimed it was self-defense, the tragic result of an argument that spiraled out of control. According to him, Andrine came at him in a rage. He tripped her, she fell, and 2 quick kicks to keep her down somehow ended her life.
She's right there. So I told her, look, tomorrow when I leave work, I'm going to go back downtown to the divorce lawyer and I'm going to get a divorce. This time, I'm not pulling it up. Which basically means I'm not stopping the divorce like I did the first time. At that point, she gets extremely angry. And that's when she comes, across the bathroom from the switch back towards the door where I was standing there to attack me.
When she attacks you, do you react?
Yeah, so when she comes, she's throwing some punches. So I'm trying to duck down and keep my face from, getting hit with the blows. And then in between the scuffle, I remember grabbing her and tripping her over one of my legs. And then she falls, and that's when I kicked her twice when she fell. So when she got the second kick, I think I heard some type of wheezing, coming out of her. And then also, in the background, I could hear some footsteps running. And at that point, I was oh shit, Elena.
By the time the jury heard his version of events, it sounded less like self-defense and more like a desperate story crafted to save himself. Because the evidence told a very different tale. Prosecutors reminded jurors of the hammer, the shattered jaw, the fractured spine. They highlighted his bizarre purchases, shovels, axes, and gallons of gasoline. And they projected his own search history for the courtroom to see, how long does DNA last outdoors? How long before bones become brittle? Those weren't the questions of a man panicking after a tragic accident. Those were the questions of someone trying to make sure no one would ever find the truth.
When you put the body there, what did you do?
So at that time, I took the bags off. I was just going to leave it there. And for some reason, I don't remember why, but I just had this weird idea to probably should just take the clothes. So I took the clothes and threw them in the bag and then went back in the car and went home. Why would she need to go through all this stuff to try to get it all? And then in my opinion, at that point, I'm thinking that's what the whole thing about going to Jamaica was, trying to get this dude to probably offer me off so she can get everything. So I get really angry. So at that point, I poured the gas on her and then I lit the fire. At that point, I got a hammer and, the body's right there. So at that point, I just got really pissed off and started hitting the body. At this point, honestly, man, I'm just really, really angry because.
Did you have any sleep?
Nah, I didn't sleep at that point. I'm tired, but I'm angry. I'm tired, at that point. And I'm just going off fumes at that point. Because like I said, I just kept repeating in my head, how the hell does this shit, happen to me and me of all people? Why the hell did this have to happen?
And yet, when it came time to deliberate, the jury struggled. 4 hours they went back and forth, sending notes to the judge, even saying they were deadlocked. Suspense hung heavy in the room. Was Andre going to walk free or face justice for murder? Finally, after 14 long hours, they returned with a verdict no one saw coming. Not guilty of murder. Instead, guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge. For Andrine's family, it was a painful compromise. The man they believed deliberately destroyed her life would not be branded a murderer. But at least after years of silence and lies, he would finally face the consequences. When it came time for sentencing, Andre MacDonald showed the same cold detachment he had displayed throughout the trial. The judge noted it openly. Time and again, while witnesses described Andrine's suffering, Andre barely looked up. But when photos of her charred bones were projected in court, his eyes suddenly lit with interest. Not grief. Not remorse. Just a quiet, unsettling curiosity. It disturbed the judge so much that he said it out loud. The lack of compassion, the fixation on the remains, the way Andre treated the trial like a formality instead of a reckoning. Those details weighed heavily when the sentence was handed down. 20 years for manslaughter, the maximum allowed, plus an additional 5 years for tampering with evidence. But the most powerful moment didn't come from the judge. It came from the little girl at the center of it all, Andrine and Andre's daughter, Elena. Too young to stand in court herself, a caregiver read aloud the words she had written in a letter to her father. "You killed my mother. You will pay forever for what you did." The courtroom fell silent. In those few lines, Elena captured what no sentence ever could: the permanent loss of a mother's love, the betrayal of a father's trust, and the lifelong wound left behind. Custody of Elena was granted to her grandmother, Andrine's mother. Together they would try to rebuild some sense of normalcy, though nothing could ever replace what had been taken. And just when it seemed this case couldn't get any darker, one final twist emerged: a chilling family shadow. Back in Jamaica, Andre's own father, Everton MacDonald, faced accusations of orchestrating not one but 2 murders, including the killing of his own wife. It was as if violence and betrayal weren't just Andre's choices, but part of a disturbing pattern woven through the family's history. For Andrine's loved ones, the verdict and sentence offered a measure of justice, but it could never erase the haunting truth: she had warned them. And in the end, her warning had come true. Before she disappeared, Andrine MacDonald left behind a warning that now feels like a prophecy. "If I ever go missing, it will be because Andre killed me." Those words still echo, not just because they prove true but because they remind us of how often warnings like hers are ignored, or dismissed as exaggeration. Andrine knew the danger she was living with, and yet, she still became a victim. Evil tried to silence her, to erase her name and her story. But in the end, it's her voice and her warning that lives on. Every detail of this case, from the lies to the cover-up, only highlights the strength of what she left behind. A memory that cannot be burned, buried, or forgotten. If you believe stories like this should never fade, if you believe Andrine's life deserves to be remembered, share this story. Subscribe so her name, and the lessons of her life, continue to live on. Because her memory deserves nothing less. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next video.